shady green pastures, so rich and so sweet. God leads His dear children along, where the water's cool flow bathes the weary one's feet. God leads His dear children along. Some through the water, some through the flood, some through the fire, but all through the blood. Some through great sorrow, but God gives a song in the night season and all the day long. Sometimes on the mount where the sun shines so bright, God leads His dear children along. Sometimes in the valley, in darkest of night, God leads His dear children along. Some through the water, some through the flood, some through the fire, but all through the blood. Some through great sorrow, but God gives a song in the night season and all the day long. Though sorrow befall us and Satan oppressed, God leads His dear children along. Through grace we can conquer, defeat all our foes. God leads His dear children along. Some through the water, some through the flood, some through the fire, but all through the blood. Some through great sorrow, but God gives a song in the night seasons and all the day long. The significance of that song will become apparent when we get to the lesson tonight, but I'll let you think on that. How about 690? Just a couple pages over there. He leadeth me, O blessed thought, O words with heavenly comfort fall. Whate'er I do, where'er I be, still 'tis God's hand that leadeth me. He leadeth me by His own hand. He leadeth me. His faithful follower I would be, for by His hand He leadeth me. Lord, I would clasp Thy hand in mine, nor ever murmur, nor repine. Content whatever lot I see, since 'tis Thy hand that leadeth me. He leadeth me by His own hand. He leadeth me. His faithful follower I would be, for by His hand He leadeth me. And when my task on earth is done, when by Thy grace the victory is won, even death's cold wave I will not flee, since God through Jordan leadeth me. He leadeth me by His own hand. He leadeth me. His picked that because it mentions the Jordan River. God just put that, I mean, I was digging through the book and that one jumped out at me. So I think it's neat how the last two songs fit right with the lesson tonight. I didn't do that on purpose. And I think it's neat when God does stuff like that. Number 740, and that'll be it for tonight. We'll get on to our lesson because we have a lot to kind of talk about, and I don't want to shortchange any of it. Looking forward to it. 740. This is how I feel when I get up and think about the fact that I'm saved. Amen. I have found His grace is all complete. He supplieth every need. While I sit and learn at Jesus' feet, I am free as free indeed. It is joy unspeakable and full of glory, full of glory, full of glory. It is joy unspeakable and full of glory. All the half has never yet been told. I have found the pleasure I once craved. It is joy and peace within. What a wondrous blessing I am saved from the awful gulf of sin. It is joy unspeakable and full of glory, full of glory, full of glory. It is joy unspeakable and full of glory. All the half has never yet been told. I have found that hope so bright and clear, living in the realm of grace. Oh, the Savior's presence is so near, I can see His smiling face. It is joy unspeakable and full of glory, full of glory, full of glory. It is joy unspeakable and full of glory. All the half has never yet been told. I have found the joy no tongue can tell, how its waves of glory roll. It is like a great overflowing well, springing up within my soul. It is joy unspeakable and full of glory, full of glory, full of glory. It is joy unspeakable and full of glory. All the half has never yet been told. Excuse me. Hey, I made it through all that without coughing, so now maybe I can make it through the rest of it. It actually feels good to cough now. It used to hurt my chest. Now it feels like I'm clearing it up, like it's almost gone. In fact, I'm coughing harder because I'm thinking, just get it all out, I can stop. Anyhow, that's gross, I'm sorry. Somebody hung this on the door, and every now and then, once a year, twice a year, people will do that. They'll hang bags on the doorknob. I don't know what this is, I'll look into it. It says, keeping him close by, www.kheb.org. Place your church special events on the 91.5 FM church calendar. This is a free service of the KHCB radio network. Maybe it was KHCB, not EB. I couldn't read it. Anyway, please allow a minimum 3 weeks advance notice. I wish I'd had this 3 weeks ago. I put the Larry the Lauder thing on the radio. Anyhow, I don't know anything about this program. Maybe some of y'all do. I've never heard of it. I'll look into it. It's called Keeping Him Close By, 91.5. Sounds like something that maybe we could benefit from, at least as far as getting events and things mentioned out there. So anyhow, they gave me a calendar and a flyer. If you know anything about them, you know more than I do. That's the first I've ever heard of them. So, not endorsing anything, just telling you that's there. All right, if you will get your Bibles and open to Joshua chapter 4. We'll be primarily in chapter 4. I do have to talk a little bit about chapter 3, and don't get mad at me. I know some of y'all hate it when I back up, but It's been like 3 weeks. I mean, we had missionaries come, and then there was a week when I wasn't here, and so it's been at least 3 weeks since I've been able to teach out of this passage. So we have to do some looking backwards. But I want to show you something before we do. If you will, just open your Bibles to Joshua 4 and verse 19, and I want to show you something. When you understand this, it'll make the whole thing more interesting. Now listen, I understand that not everything that's interesting to me is interesting to you. There are some people who love numbers. In fact, when you talk about the number of people that crossed the Jordan, it was explicitly given us the number of soldiers that crossed. It's like so many thousand from each tribe, and it adds up. But when I hear numbers, it just gets in my head and twists every which way and comes out all kinds of wrong. I went back and watched a recording from Wednesday night, and I'd given a number in relation to something we were talking about, and I was so far off. I went back and listened to it. I thought, if anybody caught that, they know I'm an idiot. It was that far off. It was just really dumb. But I said it, and I can't. It's on YouTube forever, so I can't fix that. So, in other words, some people are interested in how many people crossed the river. I'm not, and I'll tell you why. They didn't have to fight. When they get over there, God fought the whole battle. And that's the way it'll be at the Battle of Armageddon. We're going to be with the Lord. And if you belong to Him, you will. We're going to be there. But He's got a sword coming out of His mouth, and He don't need your help. Okay? The same is true here. He fought the entire Battle of Jericho, and they didn't have to do much. Not to say they didn't do things, but it wasn't on their shoulders. It was on His. It reminds me of Matthew chapter 11, where Jesus says, "Come unto me, all ye that labor or heavy laden, and I will give you rest." It says, "Take my yoke upon you." He tells us to take His yoke because His yoke is easy and it's light. His burden's light. So anyhow, it makes me think, even when we do have to do something, carrying His burden is so much easier than carrying ours. He takes the hard stuff and gives us something light to do. And so there's always things we can do. The Lord doesn't really need us. He does it all Himself. So anyway, you've had time now to get to Joshua 4 and verse 19. We're going to look at the whole chapter. I just want to take this one verse out of context for a minute, and then we're going to go back and look at why I want to talk about it. If this jumps out at anybody besides me, I want to know it. But I'm going to read this real quick. Verse 19 says, "And the people came up out of Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and encamped in Gilgal in the east border of Jericho." What jumps out at you from that verse? Anybody? And by the way, Wednesday night's not the same as Sunday morning. Open forum if you have a question. As long as we can keep from hindering the study too much, I don't mind stopping to answer questions.
Day of Passover lamb?
Very good. Very good. Anybody else catch that? When is Passover? Anybody know? According to the Bible, not according to what people do today. According to the Bible, when is Passover? Leviticus 23 and 1, that first several verses there, tells us that Passover is the 14th day of Nisan, which is the first month of the year. The 14th day is when Passover is celebrated. The 10th day of Nisan is when they select the Passover lamb. Now, why in the world is that important?
Well, in Exodus 13:3, and Moses said unto the people, "Remember this day in which you came out from Egypt, out of the house of bondage. For my strength of hand, the Lord brought you out from this place. There shall no leavened bread be eaten."
Feast of unleavened bread, yes. That's after Passover. In fact, that's the day after. That's the 15th day of Nisan. So don't get ahead of me. There's memorials throughout the Bible that are set for that reason. That's leading you to that. That reference is because of the memorial that's set up. We're going to talk about that. But what I want to show you is it's incredibly interesting to me. We have a guy named Yeshua who is foreshadowing, picturing, signifying, and showing the coming of the true Yeshua. For them that don't know, and I've told this before, Joshua in English is Yeshua in Hebrew, and it's Jesus in Greek. It's the same name. Now, that's not all that incredible to me because we have two Mikes in this church. Just because they both have the same name, we understand they're not the same person. We have Mike Barker, we have Mike Bobby. It's two completely different people, but they have the same name. So when I look at Joshua here, I'm not trying to identify Joshua as Jesus. But there is a symbol. There is a picture of it. So it's just interesting. Now that you've seen that, to give you something to look forward to, let's back up. Now, when we were in chapter 3, and we're not going to read all this, I just want to point out a couple things. First of all, when we were in chapter 3, in verse 1 there, where Joshua rose up early in the morning, they were preparing to come, and they were preparing to pass over the Jordan River. When you get to verse 5, Joshua told the people to sanctify themselves, clean yourselves, You need to be clean. You need to remember who it is that you belong to and cleanse yourselves. He's about to do something mighty. He's about to do something wonderful. But we got to be willing to sanctify ourselves so that we can be the benefit of that. God does something wonderful every day. But usually the reason He's not directly answering our prayers is because we're not sanctifying ourselves. We're supposed to clean ourselves out. Look, if you remember, and I don't want to get too far off track, but if you remember when the disciples got their feet washed by Jesus, what did He tell them? He says, I've washed you, you're clean. You just got to go over them feet a little bit. Okay? That's in the Chad Amplified version. But in all seriousness, when Jesus cleans you, you're clean. Your soul's clean. You're washed in the blood. I love the songs about the blood because I am washed in His blood and I am righteous and clean. But I still live in this flesh. I'm still in this body. And I still do things I shouldn't do. And so do you. So this sanctifying is important. It's a daily thing. You've got to stay on top of that. Anyhow, they're preparing to cross the river. God's about to do something amazing. And so when you jump down to verse 14 of chapter 3, it says, it came to pass when the people were moved from their tents to pass over Jordan, the priest bearing the ark of the covenant before the people. And as in verse 15 it says, as they were come unto Jordan, and the feet of the priest bare the ark, where they dipped in the brim of the water, because the Jordan overflowed all its banks all the time of harvest. The waters which came down from above stood and rose up upon a heap very far from the city, Adam. Now we talked about that last time we were here. I happen to believe there's significance in that city being named after Adam. And I don't have time to get into that again today, but just the whole thing is a beautiful miracle. Because everybody knows about the Red Sea. In fact, there's been scuba divers going trying to find where that happened. There's been a lot of people studying the parting of the Red Sea, and people think that's amazing, and it is. But it's more amazing to me that God parted the Jordan. And somebody may ask, why did He need to do this? What would be the point? Well, there's several reasons I can think of, but the one that stands out main in my mind is this is a new generation. And you guys know as well as I do that the morals and the principles of one generation don't always pass to the next one. Anybody looked around at this generation coming out? I'll give you an example of that. My best friend Mike over there showed me a parts store in Gonzales that I had fallen in love with. I go over there when I want parts because I was with him one day and I was really impressed by their service. So I went over to get parts. I needed a temperature gauge. And there's like 4 women working there. The woman owns it. There's like 3 women that work there, and they're just very knowledgeable. I mean, most of them know more about this stuff than I do, and I'm a mechanic. So, I mean, if you go in there and try and look down on them because they're women, you'll quickly get embarrassed. They know what they're doing. And I was joking with the owner, and I said, so you don't hire men in this place? And I was just playing, you know. She said, I would if you could find one that'd work and stay and do what these women do every day. And I got to thinking about that. That's the world we're in. That's unfortunately, and don't get me wrong, I love women, I got nothing against them, but where are the men? Where are the men who used to would work and lead and follow the guidelines of God and lead their households and lead in prayer and in worship and in reading the Bible and doing the things that the men are supposed to do? Where are those people? And again, when you get to a new generation, sometimes there's only so far you can go in Granddaddy's faith and Granddaddy's teaching. You've got to have your own faith strengthened. You've got to have your own walk with God. I love that my granddaddy loved God. God bless him. I love that about him more than anything else. I love that my grandparents were godly people who went to church and taught me right. But at some point, I've got to come to that understanding for myself. So when I think about this crossing of the Jordan, they had been hearing, and maybe even some of them as babies saw it. I don't know. It was only 40 years. But a lot can happen in 40 years. You keep hearing about this thing. 40 years goes by. It's easy to forget. When was 9/11? When did that happen? 2001? Is that right? It's only been 20 years, and most people have forgotten it. Add another 20 to that and think about who's going to be talking about 9/11. It'll come up on occasion. They're too interested in January 6th or 6th to think about 9/11. That's a whole other argument. The point is, 40 years have gone by. The Red Sea is something they talk about but haven't witnessed for themselves. So they get to the Jordan River, and I told you all this last time we talked about it. When they get there, the priests are carrying the Ark of the Covenant, which is just a beautiful picture of salvation in and of itself. Everything attached to it, in it, inside it, out it, anything to do with the Ark of the Covenant points to Jesus. Every piece of it points to Jesus. You show me the part that don't. And because of God's righteousness and the fact this thing represents Him, you can't touch it or you'll die. These priests are carrying it by using these wooden staves that do not touch it directly. It's almost like wearing insulated gloves to touch electricity. I mean, they're not touching it directly. And outside of the priests who are sanctified to carry it, the people took a wide berth. They were told not to go near the thing. In fact, that was the math I messed up. I was trying to tell y'all how many cubits that was, and somewhere I got a bigger number than is true. But somewhere between 100 yards and 300 yards, if my Bible study was right. But basically, the people didn't walk next to the priest. So the priests go into this river, into the Jordan, and this is all in chapter 3. When they step in, I don't believe they ever even got wet sand in their toes. I think as soon as they step towards it, the water goes, now that's a bigger miracle to me at the Jordan River than it is at the Red Sea because of the flow. You know how hard it'd be to stop? I mean, unless you're a beaver, you know how hard it'd be just to stop the flow of a river and to back it up and stand it up and make it stay there until you're through with it? God did that. So anyhow, he dries the river up. The priests go into the riverbed there, and while they're standing there, all the tribes of Israel, 12 tribes and their armies, pass over. And again, you can get into the numbers from each tribe, but there were some that stayed on the east side. I don't want to get into it, but it's in chapter 4. There was Gad, Asher, I think, and half tribe of Manasseh. I could be wrong, but anyway, 2.5 tribes wanted to live on the other side of the river, and God said you can live there, but you still have to send soldiers to fight, to help to take the land. So not everybody crosses over, but all the soldiers do. Every representative of Israel, and then the families that aren't in those 2.5 tribes, they all cross over. They all get all the way across. And here's where it gets neat. And we're going to look at this in chapter 4. The water does not go back until the priests come out. But something happens in the middle of that river, and I want to talk about it. Chapter 4, verse 1. The Bible says, it came to pass, when all the people were clean passed over Jordan, that the Lord spoke unto Joshua, saying, take ye 12 men out of the people of every tribe a man. Now, he had already told them which men back in the last chapter. We're not going to go over that. God had already told Joshua exactly who he wanted to represent each tribe. And now he's telling him, take those 12 men I told you about, one from each tribe. Verse 3, commanded them, saying, take you hence out of the midst of the Jordan, out of the place where the priest's feet stood firm, 12 stones, and you shall carry them over with you, leave them in the lodging place where you shall lodge this night. Now, this is pretty interesting to me. And I know not everything that interests me will interest you. This is pretty cool. Where these priests are standing, not everybody can come near them. Remember, they kept a wide berth. They're staying away from that ark. Okay? But these 12 designated men, and only the men designated by God, come to where the priests are standing, and they take these stones out of the river. And I think the reason that they use these stones and not some up on the land is because these stones have been in the water, in that flow of water. They're smooth and they're clean. I guess as clean as a rock can get. You know, they take these 12 stones. I don't know how big they were. I wouldn't imagine they'd be real little. I wouldn't imagine they'd be so big you can't carry them. But men were stronger back then anyway because they worked. But they take these stones, and I can just imagine heaving them up on the shoulder and walking them out of there. But it doesn't stop there. This is so interesting to me. So they get them out of there, and they're going to take them to the place where they're going to lodge that night. We'll come back to that. Verse 4. Joshua called the 12 men whom he had prepared of the children of Israel. Again, they were pre-selected. Out of every tribe a man. And Joshua said to them, pass over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of Jordan. And take ye up every man of you a stone upon his shoulder, according unto the number of the tribes of the children of Israel, that this may be a sign among you, that when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what mean ye by these stones? You shall answer them, that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, when it passed over Jordan. And the waters of Jordan were cut off, and these stones shall be for a memorial unto the children of Israel forever. As far as I know, they're still there. But we'll talk about that in a minute. Verse 8, and the children of Israel did so, as Joshua commanded, took up 12 stones out of the midst of the Jordan, as the Lord spoke unto Joshua, according to the number of the tribes of Israel, and carried them over with them unto the place where they lodged, and laid them down there. We're going to talk about that place in a minute. But watch verse 9. And Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of Jordan. Now this is interesting. Why would he do that? You've got 12 men carrying stones out. Joshua, and I believe he did it by himself, if I'm reading this right, He took one at a time and carried 12 stones and put them back where they got those out. You know, rocks in a riverbed are going to leave an impression there. I happen to believe whatever spot they found them in, he put a rock in each one of those spots. Right back exactly where they took those out. Now, why would you do this? I understand taking a memorial out is going to remind you of what God did in that river. It's going to remind you of the overall picture of God's salvation, how He carries you over. But why in the world put rocks back in it? Anybody?
It represents our sin that's buried when the river flows again.
God does everything He does for a reason.
The picture of the death, burial, resurrection?
The death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. See, the old us, and we understand this because most of us have been baptized. I hope we've all been baptized. Water baptism is not as important as Holy Spirit baptism, but it's a symbol, it's a picture. And so is this. Crossing that river didn't save anybody. Y'all understand that, right? Crossing that river in and of itself didn't save anybody. People cross that river all the time. There were 2.5 tribes of people who didn't even cross it, and they were just as saved as we are. Crossing this river doesn't save you. But there's a picture here that God wanted us to know all the way back then. Long before Jesus came in the flesh, there was a picture here. Take those old dirty rotten stones sitting up there on the shore. Put them in here to be washed. And take out here good clean stones. Stones that I've prepared for you to take out to remember me by. The whole thing is a beautiful picture. And all this happens to happen on the same day that they would have selected a lamb to be sacrificed for your sin. Now tell me that's all on accident, coincidence.
Accident.
No such animal. No such animal. Okay. Verse 9. Thanks where I left off. Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of Jordan in the place where the feet of the priest which bear the ark of the covenant stood. And they are there unto this day. Now, I always find that comical because when Joshua was written, obviously the Holy Spirit guided the hand, but when that was written, at the time that it was written, I'm sure they were still there. I'd like to believe they still are. I'd like to believe nobody has taken scuba gear, gone down, found them, and moved them. But I just don't know. I happen to believe they're still there, but I do not know. I'm kind of curious, and I want to look into this, see if I can find anybody who's went looking for these things and found them. So anyhow, it's another subject for another time. Verse 10, the Bible says, for the priest which bare the ark stood in the midst of Jordan until everything was finished that the Lord commanded Joshua to speak unto the people. Now, keep this in mind. Most people don't think about this, but I can't help it. I'm human. Okay. You have the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant. They step in first. So the first one's in, the last one's out. There's a reason for that, by the way. The first one's in there. They're carrying what can only be described, in my mind, as something at least as heavy as a casket full of a big man. Probably heavier because it's lined in gold and it's got stone tablets in there. The 10 Commandments are on those tablets. It's got Aaron's budding rod in there. It's got some jar of manna in there. And just the thing being built out of wood and then lined in gold. I mean, it's heavy. And these men are standing there for however long it takes for 3-4 million people, at least, to cross this river. And then 12 of them to take stones, carry out, and Joshua one by one to carry stones back. They stand there the entire time while that river sits there, and I can just imagine the water trying to flow, can't. It's got nowhere to go. The river was out of bank, by the way. The Bible told us that. All the time harvest season, this river is completely out of bank. So we're not talking about just a narrow little creek here. We're talking about a big river, and on top of that, it's out of bank. That's a lot of water. It's nothing for a mighty God. I find that interesting. All right, so when they're finished, and everything's finished, according to verse 10, then the water returns. They can come out of there, and the water doesn't move until they come out. So anyway, I'll reread verse 10. The priest which bare the ark stood in the midst of the Jordan until everything was finished that the Lord commanded Joshua to speak unto the people, according to all that Moses commanded Joshua, and the people hasted and passed over. When it says they hasted, that in my mind they did try to hurry because they knew the men were holding that thing. But I think in those situations God gives you extra strength. I just do. When I'm going through something that I know is going to be tough, when I hold the hand of the Lord God Almighty, He always, always, always strengthens me to get through it. He never promised to deliver us out of our trouble. Never promised that. He promised to deliver us through it. And I'm glad. Because think about it. If God got you out of everything you got yourself into, what would happen to your character? If you don't know, let me loan you 5 kids. And you give them everything they want and bail them out of everything they get themselves into. And watch what it does to their character. I've learned that sometimes you need to go through something more than you need to get out of something. So anyway, it's not that the Lord can't deliver us out of things. He didn't promise always to. Sometimes He does. He just doesn't always. Anyhow, I think it's beautiful that the picture of Jesus, the ark itself, stays in that riverbed for as long as it takes. There's a message in that. When you think about why Jesus hadn't come to get you yet, let me tell you, I wish He would. I'm ready to go. Okay, I know some people love it here, and that's great. Y'all enjoy it. I'm ready to go. Anytime He's ready, I'm ready. In fact, I was ready yesterday and disappointed when He didn't come get me yesterday. But I understand why He's waiting. There's just a few more that need to cross that river. There's just a few more that need to come to know Jesus. And Jesus, just like He did at that river, He's still doing it today. He's holding out until everybody's had the opportunity. And I imagine when the last few stragglers, I've always thought this is funny. Somebody's got to be at the back. There's always got to be somebody at the back. We've worked enough cows, I have, to know that it's never just as simple as just driving them into the pens. There's always some stragglers, always somebody, veering off. I mean, what is it about crowds? They can't just stay bunched together and get on across there. But even if everybody stayed together and nobody wandered off, somebody's got to be at the back. Now, I guess it's just my personality. I don't ever fit at the back. If you ever see me drive, if I'm not at the front, I'm somewhere close to it, okay? I don't like to be at the back. I don't want to be the last one over. Somebody's got to be. And I've always wondered, what kind of person does they just don't get no get up and go and just winds up at the very back of this thing. But I can just imagine as they're crossing over, whoever's left going over, there's a few still crossing. Maybe they don't walk real fast. Maybe they're up there in years. I don't know. But as these last few are crossing over, I can just picture these priests looking around. Anybody else? Is that it? I want to walk out of here and miss somebody. Did everybody get up? All right, here we go. I can just picture that. And I picture the same thing with Jesus. As much as I want to go home, I can just picture my Savior looking on a lost and dying world and saying to Himself, anybody else? I'm here. I love you. I did my part. I paid for it. You coming? Anybody else? There's been times when I've never had much money. There's been times when I've been blessed and I've wanted to bless others. And I've invited folks to a particular function. Usually, if I invite you, the meal's covered. And I've had people, I'll buy the meal, the drinks, and pay for the tip. Sometimes people just don't want to come. Never understood that. I want you to know Jesus has paid for the entire thing. And He's just so patient. The Bible says He's long-suffering to us, not willing that any should perish, but all that should come to repentance. So He's just patient. Anyway, there's a picture of that in that riverbed. And I didn't mean to belabor the point. Y'all get it. Verse 11, it came to pass when all the people were clean passed over, they didn't miss nobody, that the ark of the Lord passed over, and the priests in the presence of the people. Now, I want you to know, up until they got to the river, the priest had led the people with the ark. And now that they're over, they're going to retake their position in front of the people and go to the place that God has given them to camp for the night. Verse 12, the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. See, I was wrong. It wasn't Gad and Asher, it's Gad and Reuben. I knew that. I'm getting old. The Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh passed over armed before the children of Israel as Moses spoke unto them. About 40,000 prepared for war passed over before the Lord unto battle to the plains of Jericho. They had more soldiers than that, but they left some behind to take care of the women and children on the other side of the river. So anyway, according to this, only 40,000 went. They didn't need even them, because the Lord's going to do it all. I happen to believe more would have joined if they needed them, but anyway, that's another discussion. Verse 14, on that day, the Lord magnified Joshua in the sight of all Israel. Now, there's a reason He does this. There's several. First of all, Moses is dead. These people have been following Moses all this time. Regime changes are not easy. I don't care who it is. It doesn't matter. Y'all know I like football, so I'll use a football reference. Please forgive me. I was a huge Tony Romo fan. Love Tony Romo. I like underdogs. He's an undrafted free agent out of a college I never heard of before. And he was one of the best in the league. Now, he never got to a Super Bowl, but he played hurt. He broke a lot of records in Dallas. He played his heart out. He even played one game with a punctured lung. So I grew to really respect Tony Romo. He seemed to play really good until he got in the playoffs. He couldn't win the playoffs, which I hate for him. I wish he could have got a ring. So it's not hard to understand when Dak Prescott comes along, and I just didn't care for him at first. It was a while before I started liking him. Now, I didn't come in here to talk about football, but any regime change is hard. I understand that. Moses is dead. Joshua is God's man now. But not everybody immediately. I'll give you a better example. When I was pastor of Faith Baptist Church in Hamilton, when I got there, the man who had been there before me had been there for 10 years. He had baptized half the congregation. People loved that man. And I won't get into why he left, but I get there and several people murmured that, well, he's good, but he ain't better done. And, you know, it got to me a little bit, I'll be honest with you. But regime changes are hard. I wasn't sent there to be Brother Don. Joshua's not sent there to be Moses. Joshua has a whole other function. But in order for people to understand that God is in control, they need to recognize who God put in a position of leadership. So God magnifies Joshua, but I believe there's a spiritual reason too. Because of his name. Because by magnifying Joshua, in essence, he's symbolizing the picture of his son Jesus who would come. You'll see this more as we get to later chapters. There's a couple of other places where this becomes apparent. And I'll tell you now, I'll go ahead and skip to the end and tell you this. My favorite verse in all of Scripture is and has always been Joshua 24:15, where he said, choose you this day whom you will serve. If you think it's evil to serve the God we serve, and you want to serve one of these other gods, have at it. But for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. I love that verse. I love it. And I made up my mind when I had a family of my own that I was going to stand on that principle. Other people do what they want to do, we're going to serve the Lord. Anyhow, that's at the end. We'll see that when we get to chapter 24. Verse 14, on that day the Lord magnified Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they feared him, as they feared Moses all the days of his life. Again, that's one of the reasons for the miracle at the Jordan. See, the people saw the Red River, excuse me, I grew up in Paris, the Red Sea. They saw not only that the water parted, but that the people that died that day, God did that. All of those Egyptians that followed them across, the chariots and the weapons and the horses and all that went in there, they all perished that day by the hand of God. They saw their salvation in that. In fact, they sang songs about it. Miriam wrote a song about it. It's in the Bible. Well, this is, in another way, a picture of salvation for a new generation. And with a man as leader who has the same name that means salvation. That's what Yeshua means. Anyhow, moving on. Verse 15, the Lord spoke unto Joshua and said, command the priests that bear the ark of the testimony that they come up out of Jordan. And Joshua therefore commanded the priests, saying, come ye up out of Jordan. Now, they had already done this, but he's backtracking. He's doing like I do, and he's talking about something that's already happened, because we did that in verse 10. But anyway, verse 18, came to pass, when the priests that bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord would come up out of the midst of the Jordan, and the soles of the priests' feet were lifted up unto dry land, that the waters of Jordan returned unto their place, and flowed over all his banks, as they did before. And here we come to verse 19, where we started. And the people came up out of Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and encamped in Gilgal, in the east border of Jericho. Now, nobody knows for sure where Gilgal's at today. They think they know. They got a pretty good guess. There's a little town there about 2 miles northeast of Jericho that people swear is Gilgal. They don't know for sure, but they think it is. And there is some stones set up there, and that's why they think it's it. And it may be. I'm not going to say it's not. But it's got an Arab name, and I can't even say it. It's I got it written here somewhere. But it would Kerbet El Maf. I give up. Anyway, it's one of those Arab names that I can't pronounce. Anyhow, there's people who believe that's Gilgal. But Gilgal, the word itself means circle. This is interesting. So they camped at Gilgal, 2 miles away from Jericho. And those 12 stones, which they took out of Jordan, did Joshua pitch in Gilgal. Now, the Bible does not say they put these stones in a circle. But I happen to believe that's the reason the place is called Gilgal. Now, the reason I bring this up, there are a whole lot of people who, and it's because of paganism, because of circles and pentagrams and all these other symbols they use. People try to twist what God is doing that's holy into something that's unholy and pagan. I'll have you know, God invented the circle long before there was idolatry. Okay, I wear a ring that's in a circle, and the reason I wear it is because it's a symbol of eternity. It's supposed to be. So there are a whole lot of people who've studied these stones at this place, and they say, well, they just made up a reason and said God did it. That was pagan. That was already there. Well, I wish people wouldn't do that, because that's a lie. These are set up, I believe they were set up in a circle on purpose. Just because pagans, look, the devil's been copying Jesus for a long time. That's why there's going to be an Antichrist. He is always trying to mimic and copy Jesus, but he's not authentic, and he never can be. So anyway, just because there's other circles of stones, Stonehenge, and that place, that awful place in Georgia, and all these other places, that don't have anything to do with this. So don't get them confused, all right? So these stones are set up in Gilgal. Verse 21, he spoke unto the children of Israel, saying, when your children shall ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what mean these stones? Notice the Bible doesn't say if they ask, it's when they ask. Someday your kids are going to say, Daddy, why are those stones in that circle right there? And according to this, God knew they would ask, and he already had a plan for them being there. Verse 22, then you shall let your children know, saying, Israel came over this Jordan on dry land. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of Jordan from before you until you were passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up from before us until we were gone over. Now, there's a whole lot to this, but I want to get to the point because we're about out of time. There's a lot I could bring up just about this passage. But the bottom line, God meant for men to teach their children. God meant for people to pass on the things they learned from the Bible. I got my ears lowered today. You might notice my hair is just a bit shorter. Didn't notice, I don't hold it against you. But I did, I went and got that done. The lady said her name was Rebecca. And I always try to find me an in to talk about the Lord. It's just what I do. You do whatever God leads you to do. I look for ways to bring up God out of left field where they don't expect it. So when you tell me your name's Rebecca, I think, well, I like that name. Guess who Rebecca is in the Bible? And I went to telling her about Rebecca. And then I wound up on Rachel and talking about how much I love the name Rachel, because Rachel was the most loved woman in all of Scripture. I mean, her husband worked 14 years just to be with her. If you didn't know that, read your Bibles. I'm not going to go into that. But I was just talking about biblical women and the name Rebecca and how I love that name, and love that person in the Bible. And she says, I've never heard any of that. And I didn't say this out loud, but I'm thinking to myself, I'm not surprised. Because apparently you didn't have a mama and a daddy, and a grandma and a granny, or a grandpa and a granny, that taught you what the Bible has to say, and you haven't picked it up and read it for yourself. These stones symbolize more than just a memorial. I mean, they're that, yes. But there's a picture here of a pattern we're supposed to have. We're supposed to teach our children. It grieves my heart that we're not full of people in their 30s and 40s here. Because those are in late 20s. I want to say this, and I know I'm getting a little off track, but forgive me, I'm going somewhere with this. When I was in Bible college, it seemed like everybody had a focus either on the kids or the elderly. The people focused on the elderly were trying to hold on to the old way, not let it go for the sake of the blue hairs, because they have respect unto them. And God bless them. And then there was that crowd that was aiming at the young, because they're thinking, they're our future. They're going to grow up and we've got to reach them. And I understand both arguments. But you know, I've never done that. If I had to, I try to focus on everybody. You can't always do that. But if I had to say I had a focus, that 28 to 48 range is where I focus. And here's why. If you get them, you have the potential to get both. Kids are transitional. They're growing up, they're going off to college, they're getting jobs and moving off to Canada or something. I don't know, or California, God help them. But they're transitional. They're not guaranteed to ever be members. They may get saved and they may come until they're 18. You may never see them again. You don't know. And of course, our older saints are going to pass on. But you get those folks in that age group, and you start teaching them in that age group, and then they teach their kids. And you can hold on to the truth of Scripture. That's what we're supposed to do anyway. The older crowd's supposed to already know, and the younger crowd's supposed to learn it from those in the middle. So that's why I've always felt like that's where we should focus. Anyhow, that's just in passing, but just know that this is important, that you teach your children what the Bible has to say. Let me say this too. The majority of the Christians you know don't even know God parted the Jordan River. I'll say that again. The majority of the Christians, so-called Christians you know in this world, don't even know there's a Jordan story. There's actually a couple of them. If you want to get into Elijah and his cloak, I don't want to get there. But there's been a couple times God's done this. And then there's, of course, that whole thing with Naaman in the Jordan River who complained because there's rivers in Syria that are cleaner. Another story for another time. But these stories are in the Bible and most people don't know they're there. Now, just about everybody's heard of the Egypt thing and the Red Sea because they've made movies about that. There's no movies about the Jordan. Is it any less important? Is it any less significant? Can I tell you why I think more people don't know about it? Because of that name, Yeshua. They don't want that anywhere near that story because they don't want to have to explain that that's a picture of Jesus. They'd rather you not know that. Even the Jews don't want you to know that. The Jews would rather focus on the Red Sea and Passover because it fits into their legal system. I don't want to talk about grace and salvation through Jesus. I'll say this again for them that don't know, and I'm about through. Moses didn't get the cross. It don't matter how long they stood there with that ark. Moses wasn't coming. Moses was as saved as we are. But what he symbolized was the law. The law won't get you to heaven. It took Joshua to carry them over. It took Yeshua to carry them over. There's a picture in that. The law can only get you to the brink of the river, to the mountain right before it, get you prepared, get you sanctified, get you set, get your goal in the right direction, but the law will not carry you over. It was expedient for Jesus to use Joshua to carry the people over because there's a picture of salvation there. See, the promised land wasn't a picture of heaven. It was a picture of salvation. Anyway, we'll talk about that more next week. Verse 24 here says that all the people of the earth might know. Now, underline that word because we're going to close with this. There are people who think God only cares about the Jews. And that's why I said underline that verse. Now, this is just Israel we're talking about at the moment. But Israel was there so that we would hear the gospel. The purpose of Israel is so the world can be saved. Not just Israel. Here it says, all the people of the earth might know the hand of the Lord, that it is mighty, that you might fear the Lord your God forever. This is why it bothers me more people don't know this story. God went to a lot of trouble to set up a memorial in Gilgal. God went to a lot of trouble to put another memorial in the river. God went to a lot of trouble to show you Jesus in all of this. Average person doesn't even know about it. And this verse says that it was done so that all the world would know about it. But in a grander sense, so that all the world would know about what it pictures, who it pictures, and why. There's a big picture of the gospel right here, and that's the point. And I feel like I'm preaching to the choir because you guys know the gospel. The gospel, the word means good news. The good news is that Jesus came, lived the life we couldn't live. Because there's nothing wrong with the law, it's just that we can't keep it. He could. He lived the perfect law, he did everything he was supposed to do, and then he paid our debt that we owe. And he offered us redemption through his blood. That's the gospel in a nutshell. And we may know it and still not see all the pictures of it throughout the Bible. This is what makes the Bible so beautiful and so relevant. From the first page to the last page, it all points to Christ. Any questions, thoughts, or comments before we close? Anybody have anything? Did I miss anything? Thank you. Well, it wasn't me, but thank you. All right, well then I'll ask Brother Mark to close us with a word of prayer and we'll be dismissed.
Father God, we thank the Lord for this time. We just pray that we can see